Hello and welcome back, and here we are at Synology 2020 in Berlin. We're going to find everything new and exciting from Synology that's going to be given to us in 2019 and 2020. I don't know about you guys, but there are a few devices I've got my eye open for, and yes, I do mean the 1620. Who knows, we might get lucky. We're going to learn more about what DSM 7 has in store for us in the near future, and what great things are going to be happening with the apps we know and love. So let's make our way in and find out what's happening. Right, so a disclaimer. As you guys know, during the course of the last week or so, I've been posting all manner of stuff that was taking place at Synology's Berlin event, along with a bunch of other stuff that we saw at the Taiwanese event. Sadly, when I was there in Germany, the event and the auditorium that it was in was just enormous, and the sound quality of a lot of my work is just, even from my standards, pretty terrible. So what I'm doing right now is I've just arrived back here in the UK a few hours ago, and what I want to do is go through everything that was there at the presentation in terms of software. We've already looked at a load of hardware, so rather than make you guys listen to some of the poorer audio bits, and I'm going to overlay as much of it as possible throughout this video, I thought it would make a lot more sense to go through all of my notes from the show and go through all of the new innovations in DSM and the software and more here to you to camera. Now, a few things straight early on, which is worth mentioning. I'm only going to focus on things that are new and improved. I could talk about stuff that we've already talked about recently, that hardware, some of the new Diskstation and Rackstations that were released, as well as some of the stuff with the Flash Station series that was there, along with other bits and bobs. But I only really want to focus on stuff that's new, because if you have been following this channel for a while, then chances are a lot of that stuff, rather than focus on it, you're going to go, yes, I know that, move on. So I'm just going to focus on what is new. So let's talk about the best and newest thing, Synology DSM 7. I know you've already watched my little quick demo play of it, a couple of days ago in Germany, but definitely check this out when it arrives. If there's a beta, get on there. Even if you have to create a separate version or back everything up, it is so smooth. Honestly, it's really easy to forget you are using a remote interface. Now, the one I was using there was a VM. More than likely, it was on a local area network, the one that I was using for that particular tech demo. But it was just so smooth, so intuitive for a browser-based user interface. Now, I've dealt with NAS for a number of years, but it's worth highlighting that this is the closest I've ever come to dealing with a web interface that felt truly local. This idea about it being network or internet accessible from far away, it just felt, and it was like really improving. A lot of that has to do with that new socket API that I know Synology are going to go into a greater amount of detail on for you guys at the UK event in a number of weeks. Now, other than its cleaner user interface, they've removed that top bar, and obviously it booted remarkably faster. They showed some comparisons of that too. There are improvements to some of the core kind of configuration elements, such as the control panel. The control panel's got a much better layout now. They've changed some of the categories and moved stuff around a little bit, so it makes a lot more sense intuitively. And I know a number of you, myself included, when I first started using Synology NASs, the layout and the options didn't quite feel right. I know I mentioned a lot of this in my DSM versus QTS videos, and they've really sorted that out and improved the categories, so it feels a lot more like that should be there, and that shouldn't. That new socket API also allowed for the user interface to log in quicker too. Hopefully it's on screen. The login for going into DSM is significantly faster in this newer version. There are two virtual instances running side by side, both of which presumably over the network, and DSM 7 just went in lickety-split. It was absolutely fantastic in that way. Now, some of the other configuration options are Storage Manager. The Storage Manager has been improved too. Now, I'm sure Synology will hate me to say this, but the Storage Manager that was there before was too dumb. There was not enough information, and when they did give you information, it did not feel intuitive, and it completely messed up with the flow and feeling of Storage Manager. This new version is quite similar to QNAP's, only a lot more user-friendly. They've laid stuff out in volume overviews, which can then be broken down into tabs, and you hierarchically choose information going forward, rather than just giving you a bunch of blobs and then expecting you to understand, and then if you want to know more, click into it, and it's not very smooth. This newer storage manager definitely feels a lot more intuitive. The tab interface just makes sense. You're browsing it. I got about 2 or 3 tabs into it, and then I was kind of, oh, that felt natural. I'd forgotten I was using a brand new storage manager, which for me is key. And with a better breakdown of storage utilization across things like snapshots and applications and media types being more readily available, and with their actual capacities being listed by default rather than inviting you to find out later, the storage manager to me felt a lot more vibrant, I should say. Resource monitor. Now, I have already touched on this a lot on NAS Compares, but not so much here. The resource monitor and task manager on Synology DSM 6.2, and if you don't believe me, open up a tab if you're on a Synology and take a look. It's pretty simplistic. You know, it doesn't really break down. It gives you a few graphs that start loading the minute you go into them, which doesn't feel great. And on top of that, when you are using that resource monitor, you're giving information, but either not much to do with it or no idea what that means. And the new resource monitor and task manager built in together do make use of a far more greater scale of information readily available to you, and you can focus in a great deal more on individual instances where you need to refocus what's important and what's going wrong. The system's going very slow. This resource monitor will let you identify a lot quicker, and there's lots of other stuff with troubleshooting options that you can compare and contrast against, but I'll get onto that later on. Another brief bit is DSM tips. DSM tips has been slightly rejigged to give you more information about how to make the most of your Synology NAS, and that was something they were focusing on a lot there. I know a number of people just take for granted help pages are just like, oh, I don't want to click that, it's a bunch of web pages. But it does seem a lot more informative and sort of box-led in a kind of ABC, hold your hand, this means this way. Okay, carry on with my notes. We can talk about Synology Drive. Now, Synology Drive is something we've already, again, focused on quite a lot on NAS Compares below. The Synology Drive application is going into version 3.0, and they're saying it has a performance increase of around 30% compared with 2.0. Obviously, that's their stats, not mine, so you take that from that what you want. On top of that, the client for Mac is going to have that file streaming. It's going to have that file on demand and file pinning that Windows users are currently taking advantage of in their Windows client for Drive. So the idea that Mac users are going to get that in early 2020 is a big, big, big deal. There's some other Mac stuff coming up that I'm looking forward to telling you about later on. Synology Photos, another thing we did a whole dedicated video to, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. The Synology Photos application is that ability of merging PhotoStation and Synology Moments, and we even got a chance to play with that on that live demo of DSM, so you check out that video. I'm not going to get into too much detail because we've already covered that in its own video. Now, Hybrid Share is another one. This one's interesting because a number of you know about the C2 platform, but not a lot of you use it. You buy a NAS because you want to keep things in-house. And Synology Hybrid Share is designed so that you get this cloud platform, this C2 platform that's mirrored with your NAS, but rather than it being a faceless, uninteractive piece of storage like you get with, say, Backblaze, Synology's C2 platform with Hybrid Share gives you a link and a mounted drive that is visible of that cloud storage, and then you have those options for file pinning and file on demand streaming that we've already talked about with Drive. And this means it sits there lovely in the middle with the NAS here, Hybrid Share there, and Drive client here, and with Active Backup Suite as well running. But with all those devices with the NAS, there are a lot of tremendous options there. And also the fact that you can use that C2 client to multiple devices, and with Hybrid Share kind of choose what's important and what isn't between that network and the primary device and the C2 is also pretty interesting indeed. Now, the other option, the other things about Hybrid Share are worth highlighting. One, all that data is going to be encrypted. You should, let's face it, I shouldn't have to say that, but it will be. It's AES encrypted, and the visual user interface of that cloud drive is something that isn't really present at this time. So a number of you, when you were using the cloud storage area, you were kind of disappointed with C2 insofar as you couldn't really see much in real time about what that storage was doing, and it was being used as an offsite repository as a backup. This lets you kind of evolve that C2 area a great deal more with your primary storage. For those that use the CMS system from Synology in its current build, you'll know that it's really useful for getting commands carried across one or more NASes for waking up and shutting down and updating and wake on LAN, as well as instituting different instructions between them. That's kind of the whole point. You create scripted tasks for one or more NASes from this one platform, and it's your way of controlling interaction of data and interaction of process between them. Now, the new and improved CMS has got a much better one-shot task builder that makes it a lot more intuitive and easy for NAS newbies and network virgins to be able to create these lines of script and commands between all of these devices. On top of that, it's got a far more intuitive layout of the commands that are needed and the different NASes in your network working together from it. But this isn't really going to be something for the lower end NAS tier users. And I know a number of you see the CMS app, you might install it and go, I have no idea what to do with this. So this is something more for an enterprise-y type video, and we are hoping to do an overview of that as well. We're going to have to do a lot more enterprise videos towards the end of the year, and this is going to be a big part of that. So we might just hold out for that newer version rather than bring something out that's not going to help a lot of people in a short space of time. Now, Active Insight is this big user interface that's going to give you the ability to overview everything in real time on all of your connected NAS devices. It's not really designed for one NAS, it's designed for a bulk of NASes. I'm sure it can be used with just one. It gives you everything from performance information to update information to temperature and just basically instructions and commands that you can issue to NASes across the entire network, and it's your control center for all of your NASes. It's all of the information in real time being bounced off the Synology server to you that allows you to see everything about your NAS storage network in terms of hardware and how the software is behaving, and give you the ability to create complete system-wide control of this network. Now, again, hugely enterprise, and because the information being exchanged, I think that is why Synology are keeping that as an option. They're not really doing it as one that it's going to be installed and running straight away. You're going to have to choose whether you want to partake into this Active Insight application. Now, where this sits with the CMS system is going to be very interesting to see, because now we're going to have that overview of the Hyper-V stuff and some of that VMware stuff. This kind of is going to be another version of that, but localized. A lot of people that are utilizing huge storage hardware system overviews will be quite familiar with something like Active Insight and its advantages. But again, not everyone's going to take advantage of something like this, and it's another one of the many reasons why I think we're going to have to do a large-scale enterprise app overview before the end of the year here on the channel. Now, from it, you can see that system network-wide information. You've also got the incident monitor that gives you the ability to get real-time, realistic information about errors and problems that are being anticipated or ones that have happened, rather than a notification saying something's wrong popping up at the top of the screen. Because it's optional, I know a number of you out there might not think this is going to be something for you. I would advise you give it at least a punt when it arrives, because even if with one NAS, how much real-time alert information do you have currently on your Synology NAS if something goes wrong? You've got the Synology Finder application that does give you a lot of information, but not the control that something like Active Insight will give you. And also there'll be a mobile app version of it as well, so you'll be able to interact and utilize that information in real time too. And with the performance alerts and improved troubleshooting, they have a whole thing where if you've got an issue with a disk or a NAS, they can not only compare the current situation of that NAS with previous log information of it in the past, but also provide disk versus disk analysis to see where troubles are, and if there is a potential problem, whether it can do something about that in terms of the hardware NAS. But it does sound suspiciously like something else from last year. And of course, I'm talking, while I'm flipping my notes over, the disk failure protection. Now, this is something from last year that was very interesting, that we saw at Synology's launch events back in 2018 for DSM 7. Now, I don't know why, but they did not go into a vast amount of detail about it. It gave it, screen time, as you can see on the screen right now. It was mentioned in these speech overviews, but I didn't get to really play with this. I didn't get to see much about this. The disk failure protection was touched on briefly, as I say, and it's the ability for the NAS to anticipate a drive failure. There's so much more to it than that. But in essence, it is the ability that if you've got a 6-bay NAS and you've got 5 disks in a RAID and a hot spare, so that's one drive outside of the RAID that's just sat there with power on. With disk failure protection, you have those 5 disks, and one of them starts displaying issues. It starts giving off warnings that it's going to fail. Now, that's not new. Drive warnings we've known about for a while, RAID degradation and more. But with this disk failure prediction, the idea is that it's based on thousands and thousands of previous hard drives that Synology have monitored. Not the data, but the behavior of a healthy drive. And the result is that they can see lots of tiny indicators that a drive may fail. Small temperature, vibration, read-write patterns, and be able to cross-reference that information so that while your RAID is running with those 5 drives, this drive here, it hasn't collapsed, but it's presenting tiny, small indicators that suggest this drive is going to go eventually. And by eventually, it could be very soon, it could be very late. But if you're a business relying on your data and your backups are key, if you replace the drive a week in advance or a year in advance, it could mean everything for lost data. Now, you can set it up so that the system will alert you that this drive is giving off issues, and do you want to action it? Or you can set it that the whole system is automated. What that means is that hot spare I mentioned earlier, what will happen is, as soon as this drive here is showing signs of issue, it will then go, right, start copying all of this data onto this hot spare. The RAID doesn't collapse, the RAID's still running. Oh, mad hand gestures on screen. The RAID is still going to continue, but in the background, the system is then going to copy and synchronize these 2 drives, and then either ask you to, if you would like to, or automatically swap those drives over. Therefore, the hot spare swaps into the RAID, which massively reduces RAID rebuild time compared with a RAID 5, for example, which can take, based on drive capacity, 8, 10, 24, 36, 72 hours, depending on the RAID array and number of disks. And this, for me, was one of the most interesting things from last year's show. And although it was mentioned in this show, I really wish they showed it a great deal more, because it is going to be included in DSM 7. But I think at the moment it's a question of getting that. It's not even the user interface that's the issue, I think. I think a lot of it is to do with information that's going to be shared. Once again, not the data, but users' hardware information. And I think a lot of that is what might be causing the delay on that particular application within DSM 7. Now, another area of vast improvement was the Synology Account. Now, Synology Account, when you set up things like Quick Connect, the Synology Account is your means of accessing the NAS over the internet. Not the network, but the internet. The ability for you to access a NAS remotely and get to the complete DSM user interface. Now, the Synology Account is something you set up by choice. You don't have to do it when you set up your NAS for the first time. And that Synology Account, completely free, allows you to create an online accessible part of your NAS. But because of security credentials, and people, having quite tight networks, or you're using devices that have to interact with the NAS, such as Amazon Echo, you have to make sure you've got certificates in place. Now, moving slightly away from Synology Account, we can talk about Quick Connect. In the new Synology's Quick Connect platform that they've had for a while, it's the application there. That is basically the tool that allows outside access. DSM 7 is now rolling in that Let's Encrypt SSL certificate implementation into Quick Connect. What that means is no more faffing around, mucking around in the options in the control panel to create and establish safe internet access to your NAS. Rolling in the SSL certificate to make it a great deal more straightforward and easy into the Quick Connect platform via your Synology account is a big bonus for a number of you out there that still find network attached storage and network applications generally still very intimidating. On top of that, because they've created that simpler interface, the Synology account now has a number of bonuses and extras that weren't there before. For example, the ability to back up the entire NAS to an online platform. You can back up all the configuration, not the data. The data you want to get C2 for that, but all the configuration, the passwords, the complete blueprint of that NAS and how all the options and the folders and your settings can now be backed up to your your Synology account, something that wasn't available before. Now, I think that's one of those things that's going to come out before DSM 7. Not all of the things we're talking about today will arrive in DSM 7. They've already had a big history so far of doing more modular changes to the way you interact with your NAS and the applications they offer to you. And rather than rolling everything into a brand new DSM, they're now doing it so some of them come out in beta or some of them get rolled into 6.2. The active backup application is one that's going to see some great stuff in 2020. Before we get to that, it's worth highlighting that they are saying now that Active Backup Suite is not only this great free application that you'd have to pay a fortune for elsewhere, but now it's going to become even more of an all-in-one backup solution. Hopefully there's some stuff on screen now. There's further improvements and tweaks to the individual functions between your NAS and the active backup to devices with better support of different platforms. Not just, PCs and mobiles and Linux servers, but everything from Linux. You've got Hyper-V support on there as well. And in 2020, Mac support, something that wasn't there before. And there was a big cheer at that point. For those that have watched my DSM overview and my hardware overview, you may notice at the end of the hardware one, there was a cheer at the end. That was because of this. That was because of the Mac support in Active Backup Suite. Because Active Backup Suite is a great application for business users. It's included in Synology NAS, and Mac users have really been missing out on that. On top of that, the integration of C2 is something that's being promised in the DSM 7 next year. What that means is Active Backup Suite can then back up from all of these devices, including Mac and Windows and Hyper-V and Linux servers and God knows what, and all those online VMs as well and containers, get them all into Active Backup and then hand it to C2 in a far more accessible fashion rather than just as general data. And the Mac OS backup is just, for me, one of the biggest things. I'm not an enormous Mac user, I'm more of a Windows user personally, but even I would be silly not to admit that Mac users and Synology gel fantastically well. And therefore, if some of these key business applications are now becoming far more Mac friendly, then that's definitely going to be of use to a number of you. They're not going to abandon Windows, of course they're not, but there's just been a lot of time where Windows, I think being a more open platform, a lot of these things were possible on Windows a great deal quicker. And that's really it. There's only one other thing I didn't really talk about during this video, and that's to do with all the SSD caching, and there's a reason for that. One, because it is probably going to be longer than this entire video to properly talk about the ways and hows and a demo of these new and improved means of SSD caching. And again, metadata locking, pinning metadata, that new block size way they're going to be doing it, and lots of the cache advisory tools and over provisioning and stuff like that. All of these are things that we're going to cover in vastly more detail at the Synology UK event, with some SSD caching demos, ease of setup, and just how it's going to be holding your hand going forward on setting this up. Now, I said I wouldn't talk about hardware, but I'm just briefly there on the end. The video you saw that showed all of the hardware that was available at the show, there of course were other units. There weren't any of those big units you guys are asking about, the 220, the 920, the 720, any of this sort of stuff. No units like that were available. And once again, I am hearing stuff about those, but until I get some proper confirmation, I'm not going to talk about them here, because rather than, go off on a tangent there about something I've heard, let's get some verification first. But that has been the Synology live event in Berlin. I say the word live, here I am a day or two later. I'm going to get some sleep now, because I won't lie, I am hanging by a thread, and I will be talking to you guys more and more about some of the other sites in DSM 7, because I'm sure there's something I've missed in all of my footage. So I'm going to go through it and see if there's anything else I've missed for you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this coverage. There'll be more articles on NC going into more detail on each of the individual apps rather than a big overview like this. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Click like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Right, so we have learned a lot today here at Synology 2020 in Berlin. Everything from DSM to active backup. There was some stuff there that even surprised me. So those great innovations in Drive, and you Mac users definitely got some good news too. Now, we've talked a lot about the hardware and the rack mounts there. We actually got to take a good look at that new 60 bay rack mount NAS, which again, insane. On top of that, we've got the other rack mount units that were there, some of the flash stations and some of the Diskstation series. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty disappointed too that DS1620 XS was not there. Still our total favourite, but big noisy cars going by. It's worth highlighting that we are seeing a lot of innovations with DSM. I don't think we're going to be seeing the same modular output of some of those apps, although some of them might. And they did talk a lot about some of the things that are going to happen towards the end of 2019 and some of the promises of 2020. We had Synology Photos, we had Synology Active Insight, and of course some of those great improvements to the control panel and storage manager. Now, for those that want to learn more, do check out the following videos. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about all the individual things we learned today. But overall, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and do stay tuned for Synology's UK event happening in just a few weeks' time. Subscribe, like, and follow NAS Compares, and of course, buy your NAS from the guys at span.com. They know what they're doing. There's the plug. Done. Otherwise, cheerio, and I'll see you next time.